Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Safina Chisik-Singh. I'm a sophomore at the college studying government and astrophysics, and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee. Before we begin, please locate the exit doors, which are located on both the Park side and JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please proceed to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Harvard College undergraduate, Kirti Chirugopati.
Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the JFK Junior Forum. My name is Kirti Chirugopati. I'm a senior at the college studying government and computer science, and also a member of the JFK Junior Forum Student Committee. From managing crisis communications to shaping public understanding, the press secretary is a key narrator for the American people. What was once a role focused primarily on communicating with a press corps has evolved in the age of social media. Now, the role demands a new skill set, one that creates clippable moments and navigates the 24-hour digital news cycle. Today, as the media landscape continues to evolve, the question of building public trust remains an important one. To help us discuss how storytelling can strengthen civic understanding, we are honored to welcome two distinguished guests. Jen Psaki was the 34th White House Press Secretary under President Joe Biden. She currently hosts The Briefing with Jen Psaki on MSNBC. Psaki served as the White House Communications Director from 2015 to 2017 and also served as a spokesperson for the Department of State and held various press and communications roles in the Obama White House. Dee Dee Myers served as the 19th White House Press Secretary during the Clinton administration, becoming the first woman to hold that position. Myers later co-hosted the news program Equal Time on CNBC and was a consultant on The West Wing. She is also the author of the 2008 New York Times bestselling book, Why Women Should Rule the World. In 2020, she joined Gavin Newsom's team as senior advisor to the governor and director of the governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Our first moderator this evening is Peter Baker, one of our current Fall 2025 resident fellows here at the IOP. Peter is chief White House correspondent to the New York Times. He joined them in 2008 after 20 years at the Washington Post, where he covered the last 6 presidencies. He has written 7 books, most recently, The Divider, Trump in the White House, 2017 to 2021. Also moderating tonight is Kyle Davis, a fellow member of the JFK Junior Forum Committee. Kyle is a sophomore in Courier House studying economics and statistics, and we are so excited to have him on stage today. Together, they bring decades of public service, and Kyle, of course, as a student, brings a lot of his own experience as well, in navigating the complex relationship between politics, the press, and the public. Please join me in a warm welcome to Jen Psaki, Dee Dee Myers, and our moderators for this evening's conversation.
Hi, everybody. How you doing tonight? Everybody hear me okay? Yeah? All right.
We didn't get our navy blue blazer.
I did not get the navy blue. Yeah. Forgive me anyway. It is a delight to be here tonight. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you to IOP and the Kennedy School for sponsoring this great event with these two remarkable public servants. And I think that's a phrase we don't honor enough these days. People who go into government and try to serve their country in a way that gets overlooked in the push and pull of partisan politics these days. So we thank you for being with us. And Kyle Davis, who has decades of public service to come.
At least 30 years.
Yes, he's going to be a fantastic future public servant. So we're going to start this evening. I want to start. You heard that Dee Dee was the first woman ever to serve as White House Press Secretary. She has never gotten a question about this in all the years since then. But she really opened the door in a remarkable way because she was the first, but not by any stretch the last. After her came Dana Perino, Sarah Sanders, Stephanie Grisham, Kayleigh McEnany, Jen Psaki, Karine Jean-Pierre, and now, of course, Caroline Leavitt. That's a remarkable lineup and tells you how much that job has changed. And this is the job that, other than the President of the United States, may be the most visible spokesperson for the American government around the world, not just here at home. So I want to ask Dee Dee and Jen to reflect for a moment on what it was like to do that then, and how things have changed in terms of women in politics and also the role of the press secretary generally. And I've instructed Kyle, he's the bad cop in this relationship, to interrupt if you filibuster.
Oh.
Don't worry, I will.
Well, I'm just going to take about 40 minutes to answer that question. So, Kyle, weigh in. No, I was the first woman. I was also one of the youngest press secretaries, and I was from California, never lived or worked in Washington. That is the trifecta of how not to go into that job. So there was a lot of skepticism about me for a lot of reasons, including the fact that I was the first. No one who looked like me had ever stood behind that podium. And the great Dan Balls, a longtime LA Times correspondent, is there to remember with me what that was like. And the first years of the Clinton presidency were also pretty tumultuous for a lot of reasons. As there was no Democratic bench in Washington when the Clinton team came in. There had been only 4 years of a Democratic president in the previous 24. And so there weren't like a lot of graybeards to go back to and say, how should we do this? And so we remade every mistake that we could make. But that said, it's a great job. It's a job of a lifetime in a lot of ways. It's a hard job. It's relentless. It's changed so much. It's not the same job anymore for a lot of reasons. One is that the press corps has changed. The means of communicating have changed. And the press office is no longer a press office. It's a propaganda office in the current administration. That's by design. And so it's not at all like it was. But I am very proud and grateful that there is no longer a question about what the gender is as irrelevant as somebody's height or hair color. It just doesn't matter at all. It's a fact about somebody that might be interesting and might not be. So that has changed dramatically. But it was tough, and my credibility, my authority was often questioned. There was a lot of, and the press corps was more institutional. There was people that had been there. You had to earn your stripes to sit in that briefing room and question the White House Press Secretaries. So I came in without having gone through the same years of being in Washington. And so again, it was a tough baptism by fire. But I am forever grateful to Bill Clinton for giving me that chance, and it changed my life.
Well, you didn't interrupt. She did a good job.
She was good.
I mean, I know.
Very
Nowadays,
crisp.
it's like, will there ever be a male press secretary again? I don't know.
Who knows?
For me, I think, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, being the press secretary, it's always about serving that moment in time, right? And some people obviously have done it better than others. But when I was the press secretary for Joe Biden, first of all, I would say to any students in the room, I was the bridesmaid twice. I was the second choice twice before I got to be the press secretary. So I would say it's not like you just pop out into the world typically and become the press secretary. And I benefited a huge amount from having served as the spokesperson at the State Department for 2 years, a couple of years before that, because it helped me be comfortable on my feet and confident standing at the podium, and also tangling with very smart, very tough journalists who were going to keep pushing me on a range of difficult issues. So that was great preparation for me. But when I went in, became the press secretary, first of all, my disadvantage was that I didn't really know Joe Biden very well. And when I spoke with him about the job, I think I said to him, I don't know you very well. Like, how am I going to do this job for you? And have people who worked for him said, it will be fine. He gets to know people quite well and quite easily. And that was my experience. But it's so important to really be able to walk into the Oval Office and ask the president questions, to push them on things, to ask things on behalf of the press corps, and to have sort of the wherewithal to do that and also the relationship to do that. But it was also, for me, we were following the Trump administration, the first Trump administration. They did not regularly brief. There were some exceptions to that. They regularly lied to the press and to the public. They yelled at the press and the public. And Joe Biden's objective for us was to take the temperature down and to return it ideally to a room where people could ask questions, where there could be healthy debates. And that's part of democracy too, debates between the press secretary and reporters, where it wasn't a forum for propaganda. And so that moment in time meant that we did a very traditional, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, approach to it. We did briefings 5 days a week unless the president was traveling. We didn't change things up that much. We went back to starting with the Associated Press. We wanted to make it return to a feeling of normalcy because it had been so abnormal for 4 years. And I only use that example because if we had not followed the Trump administration. We would have maybe changed some things and modernized some things, but we didn't feel we had the kind of, the first priority was returning to respect for the press and that role in democracy.
Did they question your authority as a woman, or has that changed?
No, I think one of the benefits, I was older than Dee Dee when I was in the job, and I had already been at the State Department, and I had already been a communications director for a president. And I remember the first day thinking, all right, I'm going to walk into the Oval Office and just behave like I belong here and I own it. Also, I was not the first choice of most of the senior staff around President Biden. So I had to kind of not fake it till you make it, but project confidence that I think I had the ability to do more because I was, however old I was, 41, 42. Not that that's that old, but that's something that grows over time of experience, prepping people, briefing people, traveling with people, staffing people. So no, I never had my authority challenged, though there were times, and you probably experienced this too, where you have to kind of invite yourself to meetings because you need to be a person who's there and consuming the information so that you can be the best representative for the government and the president in front of the press.
I want to focus on those debates that you mentioned earlier between sort of reporters and press secretaries. I'm sure that both of you have had situations where a reporter is trying to really box you into a certain sort of answer or
Never.
statement. Never? Oh, wow.
Just kidding. Keep going.
But what kind of strategies do you use to try to employ so that you can answer those questions effectively?
We were talking about this a little bit earlier, too. There are times when the press will ask the same question 100 different times in 99 different ways, or really 50 different ways. And they will just keep going at you in the hopes that you will make a mistake, that you will say something that you don't want to make. I remember one time we were having a debate, Dan, you might remember this, about when the Clinton health care plan was being presented, and the idea was 100% of people were going to be covered. And so there was a whole debate about what does 100 mean? Like when you have 100% of people covered, and it went on for like 113 questions, literally about what did that mean? And I was never going to give a different answer. So one of the tactics that we often use, there's a lot of people in that briefing room that you would not expect to be there. They're certifiably crazy.
And they're not actually journalists.
They're not actually journalists. They represent news organizations. During my time and a little bit during your time, they had just been there for a long time, and whatever their role had evolved, but they were there. They were, and you could always count on them to ask some absurd, off-topic question. So that was one tactic, right? You would just call on somebody you know was going to ask something so outlandish that everyone was going to get distracted, like squirrel. And so that was one way. I mean, sometimes you would just stop answering them, and you'd say if anybody has a question not about that. That didn't always work that well. So sometimes you just had to exhaust the string, and it wasn't very productive. It didn't illuminate, but it was part of there is a kabuki theater quality to old-style briefing room, and that was one of the traditions.
Yeah, I would first say that there's probably not a day where I left the briefing room and didn't think I could have answered something better or more clearly or more concisely. That is always true. And there are certainly days, I remember when I was leaving, I think Fox did a whole roll of my worst moments. Thank you. I remembered them well, right? So to Dee Dee's point, sometimes, and this is what you don't see because most people don't watch the totality of a briefing, certainly not now. And one of the things I learned is you have to be able to answer the question 19 times without losing your cool.
Yeah.
And in that role from Fox, which I'm grateful for, is this moment where I was asked probably 19 to 219 times about why we didn't just send a COVID test to every American. First of all, I stand by the fact that we actually didn't do that, and that would have been a very big waste of COVID tests. That aside, I responded in a terrible way, which was very flippantly, and the tone was so off, and I was just exasperated. That replayed 1,000 times. So I say that's how not to do it. What I will say in terms of tactics, so a couple things for me. Everybody has different ones. Now I'm learning yours. Not that we're doing this again. One of them for me was sometimes people would ask 50-part questions that had assertions in them, and I would always say, there was a lot packed into that question, which was a statement of truth, but it gave you a moment to kind of gather your thoughts on where you wanted to start, right? It wasn't a trick. It was just what are you getting at here? The other thing that there was a lot of when I was the press secretary, and I credit the Trump administration for this, is a lot of straw man questions, like people are saying. It's like, who's saying? Senators are saying? Well, that's kind of relevant if we're getting a bill passed. Random people on the street? I mean, I value their thoughts, but I'm not sure they're... And there was actually one time, and I like this reporter, I'm not going to name her, but she said people are really critical of Joe Biden's approach to immigration. And you're like, I said, what people? And she said, President Trump. It's like, so sometimes it could unravel surprising things, but those were some of my tactics.
So just one of the things that you realize when you are the press secretary and you're sitting there briefing is that there's probably half the room thinks they could answer the question better than you.
True.
And they're sitting there like, well, I would have said, and I could have done this. So I had the good fortune to work on the TV show The West Wing. And my revenge was an episode where CJ, the press secretary, has to get a root canal. So Aaron, the creator, came and he said, what would happen? I said, well, she couldn't brief, so someone would have to stand in and brief for her. So he said, okay, so Josh goes out there and he briefs and he makes a hash of it, right?
Inflation.
He creates exactly a secret plan to fight inflation. So he makes a hash of it, and that was one of the most satisfying things I did on that show. Like, you go for it, everybody else. See how easy it is.
See how easy it is.
That is,
you remember it. That's,
of course I remember it. First of all, I had not seen any episode of The West Wing before I worked for Barack Obama, and then I left the administration because I was I don't know if I've ever told you this story before, because I was just fried, as you get fried.
Yeah.
And then I was a consultant. I'm a terrible consultant. I'm not good at it. But I watched the whole series of The West Wing, and I was like, I have to go back to government. And I went and worked for Barack Obama on his re-election campaign.
Wow.
It is the greatest show.
Changed life.
Now on my show team, I not make people, but I encourage them to watch it because it is a reminder of how government can work and should work, and people should have that hope even in the moments we're living.
Now, unfortunately, The West Wing, which is a great show, and I'm actually in the middle of rewatching it myself right now for I don't know why, but West Wing, unfortunately, is how Washington wants to believe itself to be.
Yeah. It's more
and
Veep.
is the way Washington really is. Actually. But
Also
anyway,
a great show.
It is a great show.
Oh my God.
There's a Jonah in every corner.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
All right. So one of your colleagues last week published a book, Karine Jean-Pierre, who followed Jen Psaki at the podium in the Biden White House. And she declared that she is now an independent, leaving the Democratic Party, because, if I'm summarizing her reasoning poorly, but I think her reasoning is that people were mean to Joe Biden when he had a bad debate, and she didn't like that, and also that there was at least about a minute and a half when some people thought maybe Kamala Harris wasn't the person who should be his successor as the ticket at the top of the ticket. You've seen a million White House books. You've had to answer for many of them at the podium, which are never much fun. What do you think of this book? What do you think? What's your reaction to what she's saying about the Democratic Party?
I would say the book is outdated. I've read the book in the sense of this. And this is the challenge with publishing a book, because it is published months before. I mean, you finish writing it months before it actually comes out. I think there was a real palpable feeling in the days, months, I felt it, after the election for Democrats, where it felt like nobody was fighting and nobody was doing anything. And that lasted longer, I would say, for Congress and feelings about Congress. I think, honestly, until the recent fight against the government shutdown about the extension of healthcare subsidies, I think governors were a little, I'm not just saying this because Dee Dee's sitting here, but governors, many of them were a little ahead in terms of pushing back and fighting back. But I don't think you can look out at the country and see that 7 million people just showed up to protests across the country, peaceful protests, or you see people who are activists in their streets and their communities with the military showing up and ICE showing up, and think that the country is asleep or the Democratic Party is asleep. I just don't believe that. I do think there is more work that needs to be done, and I mean that by elected officials and a range of people. But I think that it's sort of a misread of what the reaction has been, or that's how I would take the conclusion of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't read the book, but the only thing I would add is a bit of a cautionary tale. You come out of the White House, it's a white hot, red hot, whatever hot environment, and you have a lot of feelings. And I just think to write a book that quickly is probably not well advised for anybody. You need to take a minute, you need to process your experience, you need to kind of settle back into how the rest of the world views what's happening. And I think waiting for people that choose to write books about their experience is very well advised.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit, talk a little bit more about that kind of putting your feelings down and trying to get the facts, especially in crisis situations, since both of you have dealt with situations like that. How do you handle, the press wanting you to essentially be an expert about a topic that might have just occurred that very day or maybe even a few days before?
I think one of the challenges, and we talked about this a little bit earlier too, is the breadth of information that could come up on any given day. And it could be something that's very topical that like a lot of days, 80-90% of the questions on most days, right? I mean, you have a pretty good idea what's coming. You don't know every question, but you have a pretty good idea what's coming. But there's often, or maybe almost always, something that you don't expect, or something's developing and changing really fast. And sometimes there's a reporter in the briefing room that's had a conversation that they maybe know a little bit more than you do. They've talked to somebody at another agency or something, or somebody in Congress, and they're a little bit one step ahead of you. And so you are always guarding against having an emotional reaction or saying, responding to it as if or not wanting to seem surprised, and that is obviously part of the mandate is not to seem surprised a lot, but I think it's something you have to be careful of because there is so much information moving so fast across so many different verticals every single day that you have to learn to not to step further than, and I learned that through painful experience. Like you say something that turns out not to be true. You set up a condition that turns out to be.
What did you do when that happened?
Sometimes it would move past you, right? And that was like you'd have a little egg on your face, but the situation would move on and it wasn't deadly. There was a couple situations. There was one in particular, the biggest mistake that I made was George H.W. Bush, President Bush, was visiting Kuwait in the wake of the war during the first year of the Clinton presidency. And there was an assassination attempt on his life. And so, we briefed the FBI is going to look into it, and we'll let you know when we know more. And so months went on, and periodically I would get asked about it. One day I got asked about it. I said the FBI is looking into it, and we'll let you know what their conclusions are. Well, it turned out that the FBI had reported back that the Iraqis were in fact responsible for it, and they were planning a retaliatory action. It all happened within the last 24 hours that I didn't know. So I'd set myself up in a position where we were going to brief them in advance. I told them nothing had happened, and that we were going to brief them in advance of, and what I should have said is I'm not going to respond, I'm not ever going to comment on that again until, I'm not going to comment on it from the podium. And I didn't. That keeps screaming at me. No, it's true. So anyway, that was a very painful experience for me, and it was again, it's the biggest mistake I made in my years at the White House. And that was just sort of an honest mistake, but also setting up guidance in a way that I would never have done if I had had a little more experience.
Yeah. Did you want to?
Oh, sure. I can add. First of all, anyone who's said a million words publicly, approximately, like Dee Dee and I has made lots of mistakes. You have made lots of mistakes, and I certainly made lots of mistakes too. I had made bigger ones than this, but the one that comes to mind because it was so avoidable was in July of 2014, if I'm remembering this timeline correctly. I think 2014. Egypt, there was a coup in Egypt. We did not call it a coup at the time. We made a determination not to make a determination, which is an absurd thing to say publicly, but that was our public talking point. But it was July 3rd or July 4th, around that period of time, and John Kerry had been on his boat with his grandson that day. And there were reporters who were saying, we heard John Kerry was on his boat with his grandson. I don't know that this would be a controversy today, but back then it was a controversy. And I called a couple people who were with him, and the phone line was terrible. I was at 4th of July fireworks, and it was I thought they said he wasn't on the boat. So I put out this thing saying he wasn't on the boat. Now, of course, he was on the boat, and there was a photo. And you wake up the next morning and you're like, oh my God. What I did at the time, it was a little bit less complicated, and again, I made worse mistakes than this, is I basically called every reporter and I just apologized, and I put out another statement, and then I had to fall on the sword for a while.
That's a lot of reporters. How many reporters?
I mean, probably 10. It was July. It was kind of, But there's a realization, like, you make mistakes. If you just acknowledge the mistake, it's not that everyone is going to forgive you, but it's also about credibility, right? And your credibility is like, I know I made a mistake. There used to be, when we were talking about this earlier, at the State Department when I was there, maybe still now, I don't know, you used to be able to take a question where you could then follow up and send a written response out to the press pool if you took the question. If you said, I'm going to take the question, it was like significant because you were going to get back an answer. And you used to do that, right?
You would type it up and tape it on the wall in the advanced technology days of Clinton.
Yeah, and so it was a good thing, and it gave you an allowance to basically say, that's a good question, I'm going to take the question because I want to get more information.
Right.
When I started at the White House, I was like, I'll use the same tactic. And I was like, I'll circle back with you. Now, this became a whole right-wing crazy thing about circling back. And then circle back really meant, I'm going to get back to you with the information. And the thing about being the White House press secretary is the majority of your time is not actually in the briefing room. The majority of your time is like talking to reporters, people are in your office, you're texting people back, whatever it may be. So it's really meant to say, I'll get back to you. It became like a whole right-wing thing when I was there. So.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I remember once during a different Republican administration collecting 10 of the I'll get back to yous, which had never been gotten back to us, and reading them saying, okay, you said you're going to get back on this, on this, on this, and this.
Oh, well, that's good.
How many did they get back to you on?
None.
Okay.
It was actually kind of a mean question on my part. But
reporters are mean. You heard it here first.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. Not going to deny it. This White House has done something that neither of you guys did, and I wonder what you think about it, in which the White House press secretary has kicked the Associated Press out of the pool. Essentially, they have now kicked the Wall Street Journal out of the pool, and they have now taken over management of the pool, as it will, so they can have people in there of their own choosing. It's sort of a softball question, but what would have happened if you had done that? Why would you? What do you think is the consequence of that? And I suppose I'll ask a tough question about my industry. What should the press do in response to that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I never would have done that. Dee Dee never would have done that for a range of reasons. Like Joe Biden and Barack Obama, as much as they were mad at the press sometimes, they never would have found that to be an acceptable action or move. The other thing, which is self-serving for any White House, is that you work with the pool. When you're going on a foreign trip and you need to plan and you don't announce trips to Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever it may be in advance, you work with the pool, and you also work with the pool at other times too, when there is a threat or you need to get information out there. I think this is kind of one of the most undercovered and damaging things that Caroline Leavitt and the White House is doing. And I say this because if you don't have, there are still great reporters in the pool and in the briefing room. But if you don't have journalists and reporters who are going to ask the questions about what's happening that day and the questions that are astute about that particular meeting or that particular diplomatic engagement, the public has no idea what's happening, and all the public is going to be served is whatever Benny Johnson or whatever other sycophant that they have in the pool or the press briefing room is telling the public.
But they're good with that. That's what they want.
That's what they want. But that's why. But it's damaging because if you're most people in the public, I think people here pay close attention, don't necessarily know the difference between, and there are massive differences, right, between a reporter or journalist from ABC News who's in the White House briefing room or from the Washington Post and somebody who is asking a question. I gave this example earlier, like, Donald Trump looks really fit. What is his fitness routine, right? Which is an actual question one day in the briefing room. Or even more damaging in many ways is, questions like, and there was one a little bit like this, Hakeem Jeffries is like associating with terrorists or whatever it was. There's propaganda, and it's sending this message to the public that these are normal lines of questioning. It should be that there are difficult lines of questioning in the briefing room, and that people like Dee Dee and I and our predecessors and successors feel some days you're nervous because you don't have good information to offer, or some days you have a back and forth, or some days you want to bang your head against the wall. But this move, it reminds me a lot of, and you were the Moscow bureau chief at one point, right? It reminds me of, and I traveled a lot with John Kerry, the Kremlin has a bevy of state-run journalists who follow Lavrov and Putin around and basically do what the Kremlin tells them to do. That seems to be the goal, and I think that should be more concerning to people than it currently is.
Yeah, I would just add, because I think all that's right. we wouldn't have done it for one other reason, which was that we needed the audience.
Yeah.
The AP appears in thousands of local newspapers around the country, and it was an incredible source of us being able to communicate to the audience. And one of the reasons that they can do that is AP is not important anymore.
Yeah.
Right? They communicate, like you said, they go for their viral moments, they use Truth Social, the president posts, everything they think the American people need to know. It's a different world. They can afford to do that in a way that we couldn't have afforded to do it. And that is a whole other level of terrifying, that they can communicate directly through mostly social media or podcasts or whatever non-traditional form of media is generating the most attention for the people that they want to reach. And that wasn't true in either of our White Houses.
Can I give one more example? And I remember watching the meeting that Trump had with Zelensky, and one of the reporters in there, is the boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Don't know if they're still together, but for what it's worth. And his question to Zelensky was about why he wasn't wearing a suit.
Right.
This is after the leader of Ukraine was dressed down by the US president. He's facing an illegal war into his country by the leaders of Russia, and that's the question. Right. That's not a question the Associated Press is going to ask, or the Wall Street Journal.
But
they may ask
served
any other thing.
Their purposes, which was to diminish Zelensky in front of the world.
Yeah.
And they successfully did it, and they brought him to his knees.
Yeah.
I actually want to focus in on that idea of kind of like the power of the podium. I guess in terms of sort of the job as the White House Press Secretary and the immense power that comes with that in terms of both selecting reporters.
You're giving it a lot of power.
Yeah.
Maybe I am. Yeah, maybe too much.
Almost punching bag, maybe.
In terms of sort of selecting the reporters and figuring out what you're going to say and the portrayal of certain events, both now and in prior successive administrations. What has been your philosophy in terms of giving the portrayal of certain events that you want to give versus giving the facts as they are? And what do you think that philosophy should look like as the position of the White House Press Secretary?
Well, I think that until recently, I think most White House press secretaries had a shared view of a couple of things. One, that this was a rented, not an owned platform, right? We were going to pass it on to another president, whether it was another Democrat or Republican, and that there was a continuity there that was important to protect, and the traditions. And it started with a fundamental belief that a free press is absolutely essential, not vital, not nice, essential to a free society. You cannot have a free society without a free press. So I think that was even though it's really painful on some days having to put up with what the press wanted to what their agenda was. So that was starters. Now I've forgotten what the question was. I got so wrapped up in my what was the question, Kyle?
Just sort of what's your
philosophy
of the job?
So that was the foundation for me and for many of the other press secretaries, Jen. I think similarly for you. So you wanted the podium to be a place of honesty. You never wanted to. First of all, your credibility was your stock in trade. Without that, you couldn't do the job. So you had to. And second of all, it wasn't appropriate for to be a spokesman for the president to lie to the American people. That was something you never wanted to do, or to mislead them intentionally. So, with that context, then the game was. It wasn't a game, but sometimes it was. It's like being a good debater. You make your best case based on the fact set that you like. You put it out there, and the press, they hit the tennis ball back over the net, right? And that's kind of the best West Wing version of what goes on in that room. And so that was the philosophy that I tried to bring. What is the best? What's our case? Why does the president want to do it? Why is it important to the American people? What facts can we use to support our side? And let's go have the debate.
I thought about it a lot as you're not going to share everything you know, but you're going to never share things that are false. And I say not everything you know because when I was the press secretary, and Ben LeBolt was the communications director after I left, but we've known each other since we were your age probably, or a little bit older.
Yeah.
And he called me and said, well, what is it like working for Joe Biden? Both of us had worked for Barack Obama. And with Barack Obama, you have to if you're going to brief him on something, you have to have your points. It's got to be clear. You got to be telling him something new information. Mm-hmm. He's moving. It's got to be something he's valuable. With Joe Biden, I would say it was like being a hostage in the Oval Office. You were in there and I say this lovingly, he was storytelling. All of a sudden you're talking about his football career. There were times where I'd start to get up and walk out, and he'd be like, "Where are you going?" I'd be like, "I have to go brief the press. That's my job." But I say this because you hear a lot of, it was very useful, but you hear tons of things, right? He would be sitting there and he'd be talking to Republicans and Democrats and world leaders and all sorts of things. I always felt, I don't know what your philosophy was, I always felt like I wanted to know everything, and then I could determine
100%.
what was gonna, because if you don't know everything, you're more likely to walk into saying something that's wrong. But I could not go out there to the press and just say, well, Joe Biden had this long talk with this person, this Republican senator thinks this senator is goofy, this, it's not to share everything, but it's still to be truthful. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, you get caught, we've talked about it a little bit, you get caught in things unintentionally.
Yeah. I don't think there's any obligation to tell everything you know. Yeah. But you need to tell the things that you say have to be true.
Say,
Yeah. The press, they had a different view on that, by the way.
We do.
Was like anything that you know that you don't say makes you unfit. Yeah.
But let me ask you, though, a question. Let me ask you a harder question. Each of your presidents, and this is probably true of every president, was believed by people who didn't like him to not be honest. Okay? Slick Willie is what they call Bill Clinton. He was impeached for lying under oath after you left. It was only, if you had been there, it wouldn't have happened, I'm sure.
Obviously.
Jen, we had a book just come out by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson using the word cover-up about Joe Biden's health. And a lot of people feel like he or the family were not fully, and the staff around were not fully forthright about his aging. What do you do when the president you represent doesn't want you to be forthcoming, doesn't want you to be using the podium to be fully transparent, as you just say, and is there where is your ethical line there when it comes to serving them, but also serving truth?
Yeah. Look, I left the White House in May of 2022, and I only saw the president probably once after that, which was when I took my daughter to the holiday party in 2024. I maybe set like a weird line for myself. Like I felt like it was weird, even though I'm like very much share my opinions and thoughts. It felt weird if I was going to go attend White House events and I was going to be even on a media channel like MSNBC. When I was there, which I can only speak to, like he was not always the best public speaker. He stuttered at times. He talked too long. I was there when he did the 2-hour press conference, I was like, am I going to be fired after this? I don't know. And all those things happened. There were things like that he also did 10 and 20 years earlier. I'm just telling you how you're thinking about it if you're like around him. He also would, again, have like a roving set of like calls and meetings and be negotiating with foreign leaders and people in the Senate in the Oval Office when you were in there. So from my vantage point, did I see a man who was older? Yes. And we wouldn't put him on TikTok or anything. But I didn't see anything like what I saw on that debate stage. And so aging is a hard thing, and aging can happen quickly and aging can happen in ways you don't predict. And I still don't know all of the things in the last 2 years. I would say I've never felt like I was asked to I was put in a position where I had to put kind of my own morality or comfort with ethics aside, including when I worked for Joe Biden, certainly. There are times when you have disagreements about what should be said publicly. I remember when Biden was meeting with Putin, that was a long time ago, but when he was having that meeting, he was like, if you say anything publicly, I'll fire you. And I was like, okay. He wasn't, he threatened things like that every now and then to lots of people. I made him sound bad,
what
but
did
that's
he
what
not
I was
want you to say publicly?
Yeah. About Putin, about the meeting.
And what about the meeting?
Yeah, what was that?
Anything. He didn't want to say anything. I was like, well, I'm doing 20 press interviews, so I'm going to have to say something. Yeah. So my point is there are times when there's disagreement, right? But I never felt I was put in an unethical and immoral, a lying place, including when I worked for Joe Biden.
Think cover up is fair?
His what?
Is cover up a fair word?
Cover up?
No.
No.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I the same. I was never asked to go say something from the podium that wasn't true. I never intentionally said something that was not true. There were times, and there were often times, and Jen, you had the State Department as well, it was particularly around foreign policy, where you didn't want to say anything. You didn't want, right? You were hoping that these things wouldn't come up or there was things were happening behind the scenes, and there's always a risk that it's going to become public. And you have to be very careful about what you say in those circumstances because people could get hurt. There's stakes around it. But I do think there's always a little bit of that tension between the president, the White House staff, and the press secretary about how much do you want to say. I think we would probably often say, you're better off saying a little bit more. I think people on the other side who aren't dealing with the press every day say, no, hold the line, stonewall them, don't tell them anything. And sometimes that over the long term, if you play it out, is not the most effective tactic.
Yeah.
It undermines credibility. You can you can start to set the story in a way that you want it to develop. Now, just generally in terms of, I think Clinton is an artful debater, right? I think he would marshal facts in service of a conclusion that he might not make, but he might lead you to make occasionally that people would have a problem with over time. I found the most difficult was around personal life, and I don't mean about, Monica Lewinsky kind of stuff, just even about stuff with Chelsea Clinton, who was in junior high at the time, or just things that were happening in the family private life, and how do you manage, what is an appropriate zone of privacy for a president? Does he have one? The press would say, no, everything that happens should be public. He's the president of the United States. And the family would say, nothing about our private life should ever be discussed. And you try to find not a middle ground, but a ground that you can live in, which will be more protecting the president's privacy. We created, one example is that we created a family pool, right? There was a pool that followed the president everywhere, but when Chelsea was going to school or they were going to a back to school event at Sidwell Friends, like, why do we have to have cameras, and why do we have, yes, okay, we'll accept that you want to have a reporter on scene if something happens to the president and his life is threatened or something, some horrible thing happens. But you don't need cameras of them walking in and out of campus, and it's a closed campus, and so we created a family pool. We presented it to the press corps. We didn't really debate it with them. They protested, and then they accepted it. And I think that kind of thing still exists, or it did in the Obama White House, where I think the press came to understand that the president the president and his family deserved a reasonable zone of privacy.
Yeah, I was going to say the family stuff. Hunter Biden, adult, right?
Yeah.
And unquestionably has been through a lot.
Well, and there's siblings, and there's always parents, and
yeah. But Hunter, even when I left, people would say, "How could they have let Hunter come to? Like, what political person would say he could come to the state dinner?" I was like, "No political person said that." Right. A father said, "My son wants to come to the dinner, and he's coming." That may sound like, well, he's the president. Yeah, he's the president who has a son. He's lost another son. Anyway, it's very challenging because there's a human, personal side of it that you have to be respectful of and know where the boundaries are.
Kyle's going to give it to the audience in a second, but I can't we've got just enough news in the last few days to ask a very short question. But Jen, this last week, you said something about Usha Vance in terms of whether she was in effect being held hostage. The Vice President of the United States was asked about this. He said it was disgraceful. I wondered if you wanted to say anything about that.
It's not the first time that Vice President Vance has attacked me personally, but I will say this. The context of these comments are hugely important, and I have a Caroline Leavitt example too, where comments she made this week were also taken out of context, and this is the danger of social media. What I actually said was that J.D. Vance, to me, is scarier in many ways than Trump, because he is a chameleon, because he has evolved, and he is so hungry to be the president that he will make himself into whoever the public wants him to be. He's ambitious and he's young. Separate from that, I said, I always wonder what Usha Vance thinks. And what I mean by that is because he's been a chameleon. She married him when they were in their 20s, when he was a different person, it seems like, to the public. It was nothing having to do with their marriage, their relationship, her being scared of anything. I was more speaking to, wow, he's evolved a great deal. And that's scary as a person in politics and as a person in the country, because he will do anything that it needs to be done in order to become president. It was more about her observing that whole thing as a person who'd been married to him for a long time and his own evolution. That's the pure context. Let me give you the Caroline Leavitt very quickly example, because I saw this and I was like, this is also. She the other day was asked this question at the briefing about whether Trump was going to knock down additional monuments. This is where we are in 2025, that aside. she said his priority is, and I'm paraphrasing, his priority is the East Wing, right? Did she say his priority in the world is the East Wing? His priority is knocking down the East Wing over the economy, over tariffs? I don't agree with, obviously, the overwhelming majority of his policies. That's not what she said. It went like wild on social media, and that was an out of context, inaccurate depiction of what the question and answer was in that moment.
Right.
Live by the manipulation, die by the manipulation.
Dee Dee, your boss, Governor Newsom, just said yesterday, I believe, or it was aired yesterday on CBS, that he may run for president in 2028. I know you're working for the government and not a political campaign, but you're the only person who's been on a national political stage around him, I think, in the moment. He has not, other than as a governor. Do you think he's going to run? B, what advice would you give him about running in this context?
Well, I think he made really clear that that he would be lying if he said he hadn't thought about it, but that he's going to wait until after the 2026 election to make a decision. And he's termed out. His term ends in January of 2027. So he will have plenty of time to consider that. I think he's an incredibly gifted politician. He's incredibly smart. He has a better feel for this moment than almost anybody in political life. He moves fast. He is willing to mix it up. We see him doing everything from a social media campaign, which surprised a lot of people and has created this viral kind of persona, to you'll see him on long-form podcasts, mixing it up with everybody, right, left, center, for not just 10 minutes or 5 minutes, but for a couple hours. And I think those are all interesting assets in this environment. What the qualifications are to be president in this moment, I don't think any of us know. Right? I think the contender, whoever decides to get into this race, are going to reshape, including, by the way, I do believe that President Trump is planning to run for a third term. I think that what we're seeing right now is him stress testing some of the tactics that he would use to get around constitutional prohibitions, get around state all of the things that you might think are obstacles to that. So we're seeing that unfold in real time, and I think Governor Newsom is one of the people who's sounding the alarms most loudly about, please pay attention. Trump doesn't say something and then forget about it. He says something because he's intending to pursue it, and he has said many times that he's running for president in 2028. And all that's a long way of saying, I think the context of this election is evolving as we sit here. I think it's going to be very different than any previous election in American history. And I think Governor Newsom is well suited to what appear to be some of the dynamics that are evolving. But we've been there on that stage. It is a very tough place to play. You think you got game. It's like going from rookie ball to the major leagues. I mean, there is one pitcher that's done that, you savage, if you guys are paying attention to the World Series. But so it does happen. But I think again, he's incredibly gifted. Watch this space. He is personally deeply outraged by what's happening in the country, and he's taken the fight.
Well, as Peter just said, we're about to open it up for some questions. We have 2 microphones on the floor, 2 microphones in the loge boxes. If you have a question, please come forward, briefly introduce yourself, and feel free to ask a question. As we like to say in the forum, all good questions should end with a question mark. So feel free to go ahead. Let's go over here in the black jacket.
Thank you so much for coming here and speaking to us. My name is Prakhar. I'm a graduate student at the Harvard Kennedy School. I am from India and I'm an innocent bystander in American politics, grappling with similar issues as you are in terms of the combatic politics that we see right now. A stark change that we are seeing with American politics is that the combative style that has been taken in press briefings has now moved to the houses, to the Senate and the Congress. I wanted to ask you, to what extent does this lay down a precedent for the future? Are we going to see that if the Democrats come to power in the next few years, will they use the same tactics to kill, painful questions that they don't want to answer? What is the boundary where the Democrats will say that this is no more an issue of decency, it's an issue of giving them the taste of their own medicine?
Such a good question.
Yeah, it is.
I would say I hope not. I do think that the rules have changed. There are no rules. Scandal doesn't mean the same thing it once meant. Some of that, I think, is because Trump has been so full of scandal, everyone's become a little numb to it. But the other part of it is, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is I think Democrats were a little bit too rigid or way too rigid, maybe, in what was acceptable and not, right? It's like somebody stepped out of the lines and it was like, you have to drop out of the race. And I think the public, especially now, is, I don't know if it's more open-minded or more just like less susceptible to like there was one scandal so we can no longer consider these people anymore. I don't know, it's interesting you say like an aggressive tactic from the House and Senate. What I have seen happen is like handing over their power to another branch of government. I mean, Congress is a different branch of government. And if you listen to Mike Johnson or John Thune, they will say like, you know, oh, I don't have, that's not necessarily in my purview. Or they'll say, or Mike Johnson has not brought the House back to negotiate. That's not normal, of course. Like,
or Thune won't bring up Russia sanctions.
Or Thune won't bring up. So it's like there is a powerlessness and handing over power, and that is not normal in Washington, including if there's a Democratic president and Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate either. So that's one of the trends I've seen. In terms of the aggressive tactics, you know, I think that there is probably less formality that maybe that's a good thing. I don't mean aggressive like bully tactics. I mean the formality that we've seen take place with like strongly worded letters, which obviously are not exactly moving the needle. And I think that's probably out the window. But I hope that in the future, and maybe I'm being an optimist here, it doesn't result in like, we no longer believe in rule of law. We no longer believe that like there needs to be an actual case for the Department of Justice to bring something up, right? And I don't think most people I know who have been public servants and civil servants who aren't even political necessarily believe that that should be our future.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I agree with that. I think the culture's been broken, right? The culture of Congress, the culture of Washington has been broken, and it's going to have to put itself back together, and I don't think it's going to happen in one administration. I do think Democrats will respect the rule of law in ways that this Republican, not just the administration, but the Republican, culture surrounding has allowed Trump to get away with without any pushback. I don't think that'll happen, but for example, because obviously Trump has weaponized the Justice Department like nobody in history, but what will be the penalty for people that went along? How will Democrats answer that question? Should Pam Bondi be indicted by a future Democratic president for undermining the rule of law? I mean, is there a Nuremberg, it's maybe a little strong, but you know what I mean? Is there a reckoning for the people who were so willing to go along with this? Is that the right thing? Is that the wrong thing? These are going to be very challenging debates that we will face in whatever the next iteration of something that's not Trump.
Yeah, because it will be, let us all move forward and heal the country by maybe
that's the right answer, but there will be a lot of people that will say these people who almost destroyed our country, if we escape being destroyed, need to be punished, and that will be a big. You can hear it happening now. It's going to be a very difficult time as we come out of this. Yeah. We're not just going to move on.
Can we go with you up there in the loge box?
Sure.
Oh, there's like microphones up there.
We're
in the sky.
popping out of places. So, my name is Amelia, and I'm a mid-career MPA student at the Kennedy School. I also was a Foreign Service officer for about a decade.
Wow.
I guess my question to both of you guys is, we're on day 27 of the shutdown. Obviously, there have been very, very heavy attacks on the civil service, foreign service, kind of across the board in terms of agencies, and some, what many might argue, are violations of the Hatch Act. What's your take on how we sort of rescue the reputation of the civil service, public service, from current narrative? Because a lot of folks sort of seem to think we'll magically build back later better, but I would love your thoughts on sort of the narrative structures and things we can do now. And thanks.
It's going to take time. I mean, it is not going to be like one Democratic president or a Democratic Senate or podcasts that do better. It's going to take a significant amount of time. I would say that one of the things that coming out of this period of time, and you may or may not agree with this, so you can tell us if you do, is that like USAID, for example, I would say was an incredible agency, did really important work. Was there a bloating in USAID? Yes. Were there inefficiencies in USAID? Yes. So I think part of it is finding the way and finding the path. And I don't know what this exactly looks like, and it's going to be way more than Dee Dee and I figuring this out. But to recognize there's an appetite for reforms, but also preserving incredible work the United States does overseas and in developing countries, right? I'm just using that as an example. The thing about civil servants, it's really institutions that are very unpopular. I don't know what the polling is, if there's polling on civil servants and people who are like doing good work. It's an interesting question. But institutions, I think, require some reforms, acknowledgement of that, and it's going to take a great deal of time to rebuild them and rebuild the reputations.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I mean, I would be curious too, what do people really think? And I think it would depend on how you phrase the question.
Yeah.
Everyone has a bad experience with the DMV, right? So there's that level. And then there's other people who have a good experience with somebody that tried to help them navigate their health care or something, and so I think it's kind of a mixed bag. But the most important thing that you said is that we didn't take advantage of the opportunity to reform government when we should have. And we didn't ensure that it was more efficient and that it served people better, like a private company. Not that we want to imitate the private sector exactly, but government should be a customer service driven business, and we should serve the people better, and we should push decision making down and unhierarchy some of these institutions and let people innovate at the ground level where they're meeting the customers. So we're trying to do some of that in California. It's really hard. We tried to do it in the Clinton administration with reinventing government, RIGO, and poor Al Gore got just mocked endlessly. But we actually did a lot of good work, reduced the size of government, improved a lot of efficiencies. There was some real progress that was made, and nobody cared. Al Gore went on The Tonight Show or whatever and smashed an ashtray with a hammer to show that the requirements were that it had to shatter into X number of pieces, and it was just so ridiculous. But there was no payoff for that.
Yeah.
So we need to find a way to let people reform from the bottom up and not the top down, and it's going to take a long time.
Hi, I'm Jay. I'm a staff member at the Berkman Klein Center over at the Harvard Law School. And I would love to ask you a very tangible, almost managerial question about the press office. Mm-hmm. So obviously we are living in a vastly different media landscape than we have. And our information ecosystem is completely reforming itself. We see this a lot in the ways that right-wing influencers online can generate a lie, all decide to post about it, it gets picked up by news stations, podcasters talk about it, and it makes its way all the way to the press office. And suddenly something that isn't even true is a national cultural war. Mm-hmm. So my question for you in this new era where people are eschewing, like TV news for podcasts and written articles for YouTube shorts is, what are the very tangible things a White House press office can do to land in the phones of constituents? And what were some of the things that maybe were attempted in the Biden administration but not carried out to the extent that you would have wanted them to be?
Wow, what a good question. Can you go work on a secret panel, Harvard sponsor? This question for future administrations?
Yeah, exactly.
I think this is a very astute question because, when I started at the White House for Obama, it was 2009, and we had the new media department, which tells you everything you need to know, which was like people who did digital strategy. It was about a dozen people. When I was in the Biden administration, it was like 30 people or more, and it was the Office of Digital Strategy, which sounds very fancy. And I think one thing to know is that the White House has no money or budget for these sorts of things. Agencies do, but the White House has no budget for communicating to the public. It's basically earned media, as they call it, or earned social media. I don't know, maybe that should change, right? Because it is a forum and a place where information is going out to the public with some of the most recognizable people that are in an administration. I also think structurally, I mean, the way the press office works, and this is a question about like the existence, the press briefing should exist for a range of reasons. One of them is it's very efficient for the White House because you get hundreds of the same questions. Two is it is like a very important sign of democracy. Every country does not do this, but there are ways it could be modernized and changed. And if I were, like, if Hillary Clinton had won, which we all thought she was going to win, as we all know, she did not win. Josh and I would have suggested to them they change how they do the briefing, right? That's one part of it. But it's also about staffing and how you use your roles. The press office is quite small. It's like 10 or 11 people. Was it that size? How many people? Yeah. Hasn't gotten any bigger. I'm not sure you make that smaller because you need people to answer questions on, like, you know, I had one guy on my team, this guy Vedant, who was great. He was the deputy State Department spokesperson at some point. And he was assigned to climate and immigration, two very easy issues, just to give you a sense, right? One woman was assigned the economy. I don't know that you can make it smaller, and it is important to be responsive to the media. But I think the communications office could be totally restructured and changed in terms of like who does what and like where they sit and like who's responsible for what resources they have, in order to really change what they're focused on and change like how they put out content. Because ultimately, it's like, it's not, the briefing is important. Thank you for saying we're powerful. I don't know how powerful.
Yeah.
It's still an important role, but really it's about how do you reach the people who are not watching the briefing and who are not clicking on whitehouse.gov. And you need to kind of meet people where they are, which is an overused phrase, but that's not something any White House has really mastered, and they'd have to restructure entirely, I think, how they're staffed. Maybe you have some thoughts. Write a memo. Yeah. Someone's going to fund it here.
Yeah, I would just go one step. I don't think the briefing serves a purpose other than performative viral clip generation, right? That is the only thing that they're trying to get out of it in this current White House. So I think you go back, the next administration should just totally rethink it. Why do we do it that way? The media environment for which that was created no longer exists. So how do we communicate effectively with the American people? How do we reach them where they are in a way that's efficient, that doesn't lend itself to a bunch of nonsense and, you know, kabuki theater, and just redo it?
Oh, you could do it like on the phone?
I'm the wrong person to even think about it because I'm the wrong generation, but I know that that's not how people are getting their news.
No. I think
except for me. I'm like, hey, did you see the story on the front page of the LA Times today? And everyone's like, what is the matter with you? Like, no, we didn't see it. We saw it 4 days ago online, however.
Right. TikTok had a great piece on it.
Exactly.
I know. I still think there's an efficiency to it, but it could be done in a very different way.
Yeah. And look, I think there's a role for it for special occasions.
Yeah.
The president could go in there, or whoever, or you have something you really, you know, like something that's of import. You could restore the importance and the magnitude of it if you didn't allow all this nonsense to be going on in that room all the time.
It's all, I know, and then we'll get to the next question. We'll just keep talking.
Yeah.
The briefing room.
We're just going to talk to ourselves.
Yeah. The briefing room is like smaller than this row. Mm-hmm. It's tiny. So it's like that tells you the number of reporters who are actually in there, many of whom are very important and smart and follow things closely, but it's not broad enough in terms of who it's reaching.
Yeah. We were saying earlier that when Peter Baker shows up,
I said there were a couple of people that enter the room and you're like, uh-oh.
This is for reals today.
This is for real. Yeah.
All right, hi, my name's Artemis Huang. I'm a Master in Public Policy student here at the Kennedy School. I used to work as a State House reporter here in Massachusetts. And so I think free press is fundamental to a free society. And I really appreciate your talk here today because like you mentioned it a couple times as well. So I'm very concerned about like what's happening to the White House press corps. And I was wondering, have you heard of any talks among, this is how it works. All right, any talks among your past colleagues about the White House situation, and also what do you think journalists like us should do in the meantime when we may not be able to report in the White House?
Well, I would say, first of all, that most of the best reporting about the White House or the State Department or the Defense Department does not occur in briefing rooms.
Right.
And I just said how important I think those rooms are for a range of reasons. So you or others can still be journalists and reporters and report on things around the White House or the agencies or the administration without physically being in the room. Mm-hmm. Now, there's been this interesting, and you may have followed this, the press corps and the Defense Department, the overwhelming majority, they were asked to sign this kind of strange pledge about not reporting any information that was not authorized by the Defense Department, which is insane. And we say that as official spokesperson. Wait, by the way, if that had been the rule when we were spokespeople, that would make our lives a lot easier.
We just go and hand out a press release and call it a day.
Right, but that, and what I thought it was so interesting what happened is that a number of national outlets, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC, ABC, Fox, I think Newsmax, all refused to sign this and walked out of the Defense Department. Can they still report on the Defense Department? They can, but there are advantages to being there. I've always thought that that would be crazy for the White House press corps to do, because then who's covering? Like, they kind of get what they want there. It's like Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend and like one other person. But I don't know. I'm not sure if like desperate moments call for desperate times. So I'm not sure what I think about this, but I thought what happened at the Defense Department was like really powerful and interesting, and I don't know what the outcome of it all will be.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how how that plays off, and whether the Defense Department is forced to back off of that in order to try to reestablish some control, actually, so that you can. I mean, the briefings are televised, right, or they're available online, so you can watch them. You just can't ask questions. But I do think it's an interesting test of their trying to Kremlinize the briefing rooms in the city of Washington.
Just briefly, a quick lightning round question for both of you. What's your favorite West Wing character besides CJ?
CJ. CJ besides CJ.
Obviously. I mean, President Bartlett.
Yeah.
Right?
Easy answer.
Well, and I'll give an obscure one. In the first 2 episodes, Mrs. Landingham.
Oh my God, may she rest in peace.
May she rest in peace.
Yes, I am a total.
You are. You're
like
a total groupie. That's amazing.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for coming today, and thanks
you.
everyone for the forum.
Thank you. Yeah.